The morning sun rises over Riverside Military Academy, casting long shadows across the parade ground where dozens of cadets stand in perfect formation. The air is crisp, filled with the sound of boots marching in unison and the distant call of a bugle announcing the start of another demanding day. This is a place where discipline meets destiny, where young men and women come to transform themselves into something greater. But today, something unusual is about to unfold, a moment that will change everything for one young cadet and remind an entire institution what true honor really means. At the center of the formation stands Cadet James Mitchell, 20 years old, with shoulders that haven't quite filled out his uniform yet and eyes that carry a mixture of determination and grief. Just 3 weeks ago, James received the news that would alter his world forever. His grandfather, Colonel Robert Mitchell, a decorated war hero and the man who raised him after his parents passed away when he was 8, had died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 87. The funeral was small, dignified, exactly what the old colonel would have wanted. But it was the reading of the will that brought James to this moment, standing on the parade ground with an old military helmet clutched in his hands, facing the scrutiny of his superiors and the whispers of his fellow cadets. Captain Derek Hartwell approaches the formation, his boots clicking sharply against the concrete. Hartwell is a man in his early 40s with a perfectly pressed uniform, a chest full of medals that glint in the morning light, and an attitude that makes most cadets shrink back. He's known throughout the academy as a hard man, someone who believes that toughness and discipline can only be forged through constant pressure and, some would say, humiliation. He stops directly in front of James, his eyes immediately drawn to the helmet the young cadet holds. The helmet is clearly old, its once shiny surface now dulled by decades of wear. Scratches and dents cover its surface like battle scars, and the leather chin strap is cracked and faded. The paint has chipped away in places, revealing the bare metal underneath. To an untrained eye, it looks like something that belongs in a museum or perhaps in a trash bin. But James holds it carefully, reverently, as if it contains something infinitely precious. Captain Hartwell's face twists into something between amusement and contempt. His voice carries across the parade ground, loud enough for everyone to hear. Well, Cadet Mitchell. I heard about your grandfather's passing. My condolences. I also heard about your inheritance. He pauses, letting the word hang in the air like an accusation. Tell me, is that it? Is that all the great Colonel Mitchell left his only grandson? An old, beat-up helmet that looks like it survived the war and lost. A ripple of nervous laughter spreads through the formation. Some cadets quickly stifle their reactions, but others openly grin. James's jaw tightens, but he keeps his eyes forward, maintaining military bearing even as his fingers grip the helmet a little tighter. Hartwell circles James slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. I mean, I've seen inheritance disputes, but this is something else. No college fund? No property? No savings? Just a piece of military surplus that probably isn't even worth the cost of shipping it here. He stops directly in front of James again, leaning in slightly. What are you going to do with that, Mitchell? Wear it to class. Display it in your dorm room and tell people about the glory days that belong to someone else. James's voice is quiet but steady when he finally speaks. Permission to speak, sir? Oh, by all means, Cadet. Enlighten us. What could possibly make that rusty old helmet valuable? My grandfather wore this helmet, sir. It meant something to him. Therefore, it means something to me. Hartwell's laugh is sharp and dismissive. Sentiment. How touching. Let me tell you something, Mitchell, something your grandfather apparently failed to teach you. In the real military, sentiment doesn't win battles. Equipment does. Strategy does. Resources do. You know what that helmet tells me? It tells me that maybe your grandfather wasn't the hero everyone claimed he was. Maybe he was just another soldier who got lucky, who survived long enough to tell stories, and who didn't have the sense to leave his grandson something actually useful. The parade ground has gone completely silent now. Even the wind seems to have stopped. Several cadets exchange uncomfortable glances. This has gone beyond the usual tough love approach that Hartwell is known for. This is personal and everyone can feel it. James's face has gone pale, but his eyes remain fixed straight ahead. Sir, my grandfather was a hero. He saved lives. He served with honor. Honor. Hartwell practically spits the word. You want to talk about honor? Your grandfather served in a different era, Mitchell. A simpler time. These days, we need soldiers who understand that survival requires more than pretty words and old stories. We need soldiers who come from means, who have resources, who can think strategically about their futures. Not cadets who cling to worthless relics because they don't have anything else. He reaches out and actually flicks the helmet with his finger, making a dull metallic sound. This is junk, Mitchell. Accept it. Your grandfather left you junk because maybe, deep down, that's all he thought you were worth. The words hit like a physical blow. James's composure finally cracks, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, though he fights desperately to maintain control. Around him, several cadets look away, unable to watch. This has crossed a line that shouldn't have been crossed. But then something unexpected happens. Another voice cuts through the tension, older, rough with authority. Captain Hartwell, that's enough. Everyone turns to see Major William Carson approaching across the parade ground. Carson is in his late 60s, one of the most senior instructors at the academy, a man who fought in 3 different conflicts and earned more medals than he ever wears. He moves with the deliberate pace of someone who knows his authority is unquestionable. His face is stern, his eyes locked on Hartwell with an expression that makes the younger officer straighten involuntarily. Major Carson, sir, I was just conducting an inspection. That wasn't an inspection, Captain. That was a disgrace. Carson stops beside James, looking down at the helmet the young man holds. His entire demeanor changes, the hardness melting away to reveal something like wonder. May I, Cadet Mitchell? James hesitates for only a moment before carefully handing the helmet to the major. Carson takes it with both hands, turning it slowly, examining every inch with the care of someone handling a sacred artifact. His fingers trace the scratches, the dents, the faded paint. When he speaks again, his voice is quiet, almost reverent. Captain Hartwell, do you know what you're looking at? Hartwell shifts uncomfortably. An old helmet, sir. Standard issue, probably from the Vietnam era based on the design. Standard issue, Carson repeats, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Come closer, Captain. Bring the formation closer. Everyone needs to see this. There's a moment of confusion as the order is given and the cadets break formation, gathering in a loose circle around Carson, James, and Hartwell. The major holds the helmet up so everyone can see it clearly. You're right about one thing, Captain. This helmet is from the Vietnam era. But it's far from standard issue. Look here. He points to a series of small marks on the side of the helmet, barely visible scratches that form a pattern. These are tally marks. 12 of them. Each one represents a life saved. Not an enemy eliminated, not a mission completed, but a life saved. Do you understand the difference, Captain? Hartwell says nothing, his face growing rigid. Carson continues, his voice growing stronger. Colonel Robert Mitchell was a field medic, one of the best who ever served. He didn't carry a rifle. He carried medical supplies. He didn't seek out combat. Combat found him over and over again, and every single time he ran toward it when everyone else was running away. This helmet went with him into fire zones, into ambush sites, into places where the ground was so torn up by artillery that you couldn't tell where the earth ended and the chaos began. He turns the helmet, showing another section. Here. See this dent? That's from shrapnel. A mortar round landed 15 feet from where Colonel Mitchell was treating a wounded soldier. The blast should have eliminated both of them. This helmet took the worst of it, and the colonel kept working, finished his treatment, and carried that soldier 300 yards to an evacuation zone. The soldier survived. His name was Marcus Williams. He went on to become a teacher, raised 4 children, touched hundreds of lives. All because a medic with an old helmet refused to leave him behind. The gathered cadets are completely silent now, hanging on every word. Even Hartwell has gone pale, though whether from anger or shame is impossible to tell. Carson points to another mark, a long scratch that runs from the front to the back of the helmet. This one came from a bullet. Not a direct hit, thank God, but close enough. The colonel was extracting wounded from a crashed helicopter when enemy fire pinned down the rescue team. He made 4 trips into that kill zone wearing this helmet, bringing out 1 soldier each time. On the 4th trip, a sniper's bullet grazed the helmet, knocked him down, but he got back up, finished the extraction, and didn't even go to medical until everyone else was safe. Major Carson's eyes sweep across the gathered cadets, making sure he has everyone's attention. This helmet has been through 3 combat tours. It's been in jungles and rice paddies. It's been in situations where the temperature was so high that metal would burn your skin, and so cold that your fingers would freeze to your weapon. Through all of it, Colonel Mitchell wore this helmet and saved lives. Not some lives. Not a few lives. 147 documented saves over his career. 147 people who went home to their families because a medic refused to give up. He hands the helmet back to James, who takes it with trembling hands, tears now flowing freely down his face. After the war, Colonel Mitchell became a physician. He opened a free clinic in an underserved neighborhood and spent 40 years providing medical care to people who couldn't afford it. He never married, never had children of his own, but he raised his grandson after tragedy struck their family. He taught that young man about service, about sacrifice, about what it means to be part of something larger than yourself. Carson turns to face Hartwell directly now, and there's steel in his voice. Captain Hartwell, you mocked this cadet for inheriting an old helmet. You called it junk. You suggested that Colonel Mitchell wasn't a real hero. You implied that this inheritance somehow reflected poorly on Cadet Mitchell's worth as a soldier. In doing so, you revealed something critical, not about this cadet or his grandfather, but about yourself. Hartwell's face is now completely drained of color, but Carson isn't finished. You see, Captain, there are two types of military leaders. There are those who measure worth in material possessions, in medals that glitter, in displays of wealth and status. They believe that strength comes from what you have, what you own, what you can show off. And then there are those who understand that true military valor comes from service, from sacrifice, from the willingness to put others before yourself even when nobody is watching, even when there's no reward, even when all you have is an old helmet and the knowledge that you did the right thing. The major gestures to the helmet in James's hands. This helmet is worth more than all the medals on your chest, Captain. It represents the kind of soldier every military academy should aspire to produce. Not someone who seeks glory, but someone who seeks to serve. Not someone who measures success by personal gain, but someone who measures it by lives improved, by communities strengthened, by a world made slightly better through individual action. Carson's voice softens slightly, though the authority remains. Cadet Mitchell, I served with your grandfather in my early years. I was a young lieutenant, fresh out of the academy, convinced I knew everything about leadership. Your grandfather taught me that I knew nothing. He showed me what real courage looked like. He showed me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not to fight, but to heal. Not to destroy, but to preserve. Not to seek glory, but to seek meaning. James can barely speak, his voice choked with emotion. Sir, I didn't know all of this. My grandfather never talked much about his service. Of course he didn't, Carson says gently. The real heroes never do. They don't need to tell their stories because they know the stories aren't about them. They're about the people they served, the lives they touched, the difference they made. The major turns back to address the entire formation. Let this be a lesson to all of you. When you leave this academy, you will go into a world that constantly tries to measure your worth by the wrong metrics. Money, status, possessions, titles. But I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember that true worth, true honor, true valor has nothing to do with what you own and everything to do with who you serve. He looks directly at Hartwell again. Captain, you will write a formal apology to Cadet Mitchell. You will also write a 5,000-word essay on the importance of empathy in military leadership, which you will present to the entire academy at next month's assembly. And you will spend the next 6 months working alongside me in the Veterans Outreach Program, where you will learn firsthand about the soldiers whose service may not have made them wealthy, but whose contributions are immeasurable. Hartwell's jaw works for a moment, and for a second, it seems like he might argue. But the look in Carson's eyes stops him cold. Yes, sir, he manages, his voice barely above a whisper. Dismissed, Captain. The rest of you return to formation. As the cadets move back into their positions and Hartwell walks away, shoulders hunched, Carson places a hand on James's shoulder. Your grandfather would be proud of you, son. Not because of how you reacted today, though you showed remarkable restraint and discipline. He would be proud because you're here, serving, carrying on a tradition of honor that spans generations. James looks down at the helmet, seeing it with completely new eyes now. Sir, I had no idea this helmet had been through so much. Grandfather just kept it on a shelf in his study. I always thought it was just a memento. It is a memento, Carson says. But some mementos carry the weight of history. Your grandfather kept it on that shelf because every time he looked at it, he remembered not the danger, not the fear, but the people he saved. The families that stayed whole. The futures that remain possible. That's what he wanted you to inherit, James. Not metal and leather, but a legacy of service. Over the next few days, the story of what happened on the parade ground spreads throughout the academy. Cadets who had laughed along with Hartwell's mockery find themselves feeling ashamed. The ones who had remained silent feel guilty for not speaking up. And everyone begins to look at James Mitchell differently, not with pity or amusement, but with respect. James starts carrying the helmet with him more often, not as a burden but as a reminder. Other cadets ask to see it, to hear the stories that Major Carson shared. Each scratch, each dent, each imperfection becomes a talking point, a lesson, a window into a type of service that many of them had never considered before. Captain Hartwell undergoes a transformation as well. though it's slower and more painful. The essay he's required to write forces him to confront his own prejudices, his own narrow definition of worth. Working in the Veterans Outreach Program, he meets soldiers who served with distinction but came home to difficult circumstances. He hears stories of courage that never made it into official records, of sacrifices that received no recognition, of heroes who measured their success not in medals but in lives lived with purpose. One afternoon, several weeks after the incident, Hartwell finds James in the library, studying. The captain approaches hesitantly and James looks up, his body tensing slightly. "Cadet Mitchell, may I speak with you?" James stands immediately, coming to attention. "Of course, sir." Hartwell gestures to a nearby chair. "At ease. Please sit. This isn't official business. It's personal." They sit across from each other and for a long moment Hartwell struggles to find the words. Finally he speaks, his voice lacking all of its usual hardness. "I owe you more than an apology, though that's certainly where I need to start. What I said on the parade ground was unacceptable. It was cruel, it was unprofessional, and it revealed something about myself that I'm not proud of." James starts to respond, but Hartwell holds up a hand. "Please let me finish. I've spent the last few weeks working with veterans, hearing their stories, understanding what real service looks like. I've met men and women who gave everything for this country and have nothing to show for it except their dignity and their memories. I've met soldiers who came home broken and spent years rebuilding themselves. I've met families who sacrificed right alongside their service members, who endured deployments and uncertainty and fear." He pauses, his eyes dropping to the table. "I've also had to confront the fact that I came from privilege. My father was a general, my grandfather was an admiral. I grew up in military housing on bases around the world. I went to private schools. I never had to worry about whether I could afford my education or whether I'd have opportunities after service. I confused that privilege with merit. I assumed that because I had resources, I somehow deserved them, that they reflected my own worth rather than the circumstances of my birth." Hartwell looks back up at James. "Your grandfather understood something that I'm only beginning to grasp. That true worth isn't about what you have, it's about what you give. It's about showing up, day after day, even when it's hard, even when nobody notices, even when the only reward is knowing that you did the right thing." James's expression has softened. "Sir, I appreciate you saying this. Truly. But I think everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what we do after we make them." "That's generous of you, more generous than I deserve." Hartwell stands and James does the same. "I want you to know that I've requested a transfer. I'll be leaving the academy at the end of the semester to take a position training medics. It turns out that after learning about your grandfather's service, I've become interested in the work that field medics do. Major Carson has been helping me understand the training pipeline, and I think it's where I need to be." James extends his hand and after a moment Hartwell shakes it. "That sounds like meaningful work, sir. I hope it brings you what you're looking for." As the semester progresses, the impact of that morning on the parade ground continues to ripple outward. Major Carson organizes a special assembly where he invites several veterans to speak about their service. Among them is Marcus Williams, the teacher whose life was saved by Colonel Mitchell decades ago. Williams is now in his 70s, retired from teaching, but still sharp and engaging. He stands before the assembled cadets, holding a photograph. "This is me at 22 years old," he says, showing the picture of a young soldier in uniform. "I thought I knew everything. I thought I was invincible. Then one afternoon in a jungle thousands of miles from home, I learned how fragile life really is." He describes the ambush, the chaos, the moment when he felt the searing pain and knew he was badly hurt. "I remember lying there thinking about my mother, my girlfriend back home who would become my wife, the life I wouldn't get to live. And then I heard someone running toward me, not away from me, toward me, through the same fire that had just cut me down." Williams's voice catches. "Colonel Mitchell got to me, assessed my injuries and started treatment right there while bullets were still flying. He talked to me the whole time, kept me conscious, kept me focused. He said, 'Stay with me, soldier. You've got too much life left to live to check out now.' And then he picked me up, threw me over his shoulder, and carried me 300 yards to safety." He wipes his eyes. "I spent 6 months recovering. I came home, married that girlfriend, became a teacher. Over 40 years, I taught history to thousands of students. I watched them grow, graduate, become doctors and lawyers and teachers themselves. I had 4 children who have given me 9 grandchildren. I've had a good life, a full life, a meaningful life. And none of it would have happened without that medic who wore an old helmet and refused to leave anyone behind." Williams looks directly at James, who is sitting in the front row. "Your grandfather saved my life, Cadet Mitchell. But more than that, he saved all the lives that grew from mine. My children, my grandchildren, my students. When you calculate the impact of one person's service, you can't just count the immediate effect. You have to count the ripples that spread out over decades, touching hundreds or thousands of people. That's what your grandfather's legacy really is. Not a helmet, but a web of lives made possible by one man's courage and compassion. The assembly ends with a standing ovation that lasts several minutes. Afterward, James is surrounded by cadets wanting to hear more about his grandfather, wanting to understand how they can carry forward that same spirit of service. That evening, James returns to his dorm room and places the helmet carefully on his desk. He sits in front of it for a long time, thinking about everything that's happened, everything he's learned. Then he takes out a piece of paper and begins to write. The letter is to his grandfather, even though he knows no one will read it. In it, James pours out his gratitude, his regrets, his hopes for the future. He writes about the mockery on the parade ground and how it transformed into understanding. He writes about Major Carson's revelations and Marcus Williams's testimony. He writes about how a piece of old military equipment became a symbol of everything meaningful about service. I understand now, grandfather, he writes. You didn't leave me nothing. You left me everything. You left me a roadmap for how to live with purpose, how to measure success not by what I accumulate but by what I contribute. You left me a reminder that the most important battles aren't always fought with weapons, that sometimes the greatest courage is shown not by those who take lives but by those who save them. He describes his decision to follow in his grandfather's footsteps, to train as a field medic after graduation. I want to carry forward what you started, he writes. I want to wear a helmet, maybe even this helmet if regulations allow, and I want to run toward danger when others run away. I want to save lives. I want to make a difference. I want to live a life that honors the legacy you've given me. The letter ends with a simple statement. Thank you for the helmet, grandfather. Thank you for everything it represents. I promise I won't let you down. Several months later, at the Academy's graduation ceremony, James stands among his fellow cadets, ready to receive his commission. Major Carson presides over the ceremony, and when he calls James's name, there's a special announcement. Cadet Mitchell has chosen to serve as a field medic, Carson tells the assembled crowd of families and friends. In recognition of his commitment to the highest ideals of military service, and in honor of his grandfather's legacy, the Academy is establishing the Colonel Robert Mitchell Award for Service Excellence. This award will be given annually to the cadet who best exemplifies the principles of compassion, courage, and selfless service that defined Colonel Mitchell's career. Carson holds up the old helmet, now carefully preserved and mounted on a display stand. This helmet will remain here at the Academy as a reminder to all future cadets that true worth cannot be measured in material terms. It will remind them that some legacies are priceless, that some inheritances are beyond value, and that the greatest warriors are often those who fight not to destroy, but to preserve life. The crowd erupts in applause. James's eyes fill with tears, but this time they're tears of pride and gratitude rather than pain. As he accepts his commission, shaking hands with Major Carson, the old officer leans in close. Your grandfather is watching, son. And he's proud. James nods, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He looks out at the audience and sees faces representing all different backgrounds, all different stories, all different paths to service. Some come from wealth, others from poverty. Some have families with military traditions spanning generations, others are the first in their families to serve. But in this moment they're all equal, all united by a commitment to something larger than themselves. In the weeks that follow graduation, as James reports to his first assignment, he carries with him the lessons learned from an old helmet and the captain who mocked it. He understands now that every person he encounters has a story, that assumptions based on appearances or circumstances are often wrong, and that true leadership requires empathy, humility, and the wisdom to recognize value in unexpected places. Years later, when James is a decorated field medic himself, having saved dozens of lives across multiple deployments, a young soldier asks him about the photograph he keeps in his medical kit. It's an image of an old helmet, scratched and dented, unremarkable to anyone who doesn't know its story. That, James says with a smile, is the most valuable thing I've ever owned. Let me tell you about my grandfather and the day a captain learned an important lesson about worth and dignity and what it really means to inherit something precious. And as he tells the story once again, the legacy continues, spreading to another generation, touching another life, proving that some inheritances can never be measured in material terms because their value lies in the truth they teach, the principles they represent, and the lives they continue to change long after the original owner has gone. The old helmet sits in its place of honor at Riverside Military Academy, a silent testament to courage, a reminder of sacrifice, and a symbol of the enduring power of true service. Cadets pass it daily, some stopping to read the plaque that tells Colonel Mitchell's story, others simply touching it briefly as they walk by, drawing strength from its presence. And somewhere, in a field hospital or a combat zone or a training facility, James Mitchell continues his grandfather's work, saving lives, making a difference, proving every day that the most valuable inheritance isn't money or property, but the example of a life well lived and the courage to follow that example wherever it leads. The story that began with mockery and misunderstanding has become a legend of redemption and revelation, teaching each new generation that worth cannot be measured by what you own, only by who you serve and how you serve them. It reminds everyone who hears it that sometimes the things that appear most worthless are actually priceless, and that true wealth lies not in possessions but in purpose. This is the legacy of an old helmet, a humble medic, and a young cadet who refused to let mockery define him. It's a story about finding value in unexpected places, about standing firm in the face of ridicule, and about the transformative power of understanding someone's true story before judging their worth. And it's a reminder that in the end, we are all defined not by what we inherit, but by what we do with that inheritance, not by what we receive but by what we give, and not by the judgments others place upon us, but by the integrity with which we live our lives and serve those around us. The sun sets over Riverside Military Academy, casting long shadows across the parade ground where this story began. The flag is lowered with military precision, cadets stand at attention, and somewhere in the gathering darkness, an old helmet waits to teach its lesson to the next person who needs to hear it, the next soul who needs to be reminded that true value, true worth, true honor cannot be mocked or diminished because they exist beyond material measurement, living forever in the hearts and actions of those who understand what it really means to serve. But this story doesn't end with graduation or with James's deployment. In fact, the most powerful chapters are still to be written, chapters that will test everything he's learned, challenge his understanding of his grandfather's legacy, and ultimately reveal truths that go even deeper than anyone could have imagined. 3 years after graduation, field medic James Mitchell finds himself in a remote mountain region, part of a humanitarian mission providing medical assistance to villages affected by natural disasters. The work is exhausting, the conditions are harsh, and the needs are overwhelming. Every day brings new challenges: sick children, injured workers, elderly people who haven't seen a doctor in years. James works alongside a small team of medical personnel, including Dr. Sarah Chin, a physician with Doctors Without Borders who has spent 15 years working in conflict zones and disaster areas. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, James sits outside the medical tent, cleaning his equipment. He started carrying a small replica of his grandfather's helmet, a reminder of the principles that guide his work. Dr. Chin notices it and sits down beside him, curious about the small metal object that he handles with such obvious care. "That's an interesting keepsake," she observes. "Does it have a story?" James smiles, realizing he never tires of telling his grandfather's story. He shares the tale of the old helmet, Captain Hartwell's mockery, Major Carson's revelation, and all the lessons learned from that transformative day. Dr. Chin listens intently, and when he finishes, she's quiet for a long moment. "Your grandfather sounds like an extraordinary man," she finally says. "But I wonder if you know the whole story." James looks at her, confused. "What do you mean?" Dr. Chin pulls out her phone and spends a few minutes searching for something. "What was your grandfather's full name?" "Colonel Robert James Mitchell." "Why?" She turns the phone toward him, showing an article from a medical journal dated 15 years earlier. The headline reads, "The Mitchell Protocol, Revolutionary Approach to Field Trauma Care Saves Thousands." James's eyes widen as he reads, his grandfather's name appearing throughout the article. "I don't understand," he says quietly. "My grandfather never mentioned this. Major Carson never mentioned this. What is the Mitchell Protocol?" Dr. Chin leans back, her expression a mixture of respect and surprise. The Mitchell Protocol is a series of emergency medical procedures that have been used in field medicine for decades. It revolutionized how medics handle certain types of trauma in resource-limited environments. The techniques were developed by Colonel Robert Mitchell based on his experiences during the war, refined over years of practice, and eventually published in military medical journals. Every field medic in the world learns the Mitchell Protocol during training. "You learned it yourself, didn't you?" James's mind races back through his training, remembering the procedures he'd been taught, techniques he uses daily. They were simply presented as standard protocol, best practices developed over time. He never knew they bore his grandfather's name, never realized that the man who raised him had contributed so fundamentally to the field he now works in. But why wouldn't anyone tell me? Why wouldn't my grandfather mention this? Why didn't Major Carson bring it up during that assembly? I can't answer that, Dr. Chin says gently. But I suspect your grandfather was exactly the kind of person who didn't want recognition. He developed these techniques to save lives, not to build a legacy. And maybe Major Carson didn't know. Not everyone realizes where the protocols they use come from. That night, James lies awake in his tent, processing this revelation. The helmet was just the beginning, just the visible symbol of a legacy far more profound than anyone had realized. His grandfather hadn't just saved 147 lives directly. Through the protocols he developed, he'd influenced the saving of thousands, maybe tens of thousands across generations of conflicts and disasters. The next morning, James requests permission to make some calls back to the United States. He reaches Major Carson, now retired but still involved with the academy. When James tells him about the Mitchell Protocol, there's a long silence on the other end of the line. My God, Carson says finally. I never made the connection. I learned those procedures 30 years ago. They were already standard by the time I went through medical training. I never thought to trace them back to their origin. His voice breaks slightly. James, your grandfather's legacy is even greater than I told those cadets. He didn't just save lives personally. He created a system that's been saving lives for decades after his service ended. Sir, why do you think he never told anyone? Why keep something like this quiet? Carson chuckles softly. That was Robert Mitchell. He didn't do things for recognition. He did them because they needed to be done. Publishing those protocols wasn't about building his reputation. It was about ensuring that future medics had better tools than he did, that they could save more lives more effectively. That's the difference between someone who serves for glory and someone who serves for purpose. When James returns to his team, he shares what he's learned with Dr. Chin and the other medical personnel. The revelation sparks a deeper conversation about legacy, about the countless people throughout history who made profound contributions without seeking recognition, who changed the world quietly while others took the credit or while their names were simply forgotten. Dr. Chin shares her own story. My mother was a nurse during a major epidemic 30 years ago. She worked 18-hour days for months, developed new triage systems that helped manage overwhelming patient loads, trained dozens of local healthcare workers who went on to serve their communities for decades. When she passed away, there was a small obituary in the local paper. No awards, no recognition, no protocols named after her. But her impact lives on through the people she trained, the systems she built, the example she set. This conversation becomes a turning point for James. He realizes that the helmet, powerful as its symbolism was, represented only a fraction of his grandfather's true legacy. The real inheritance wasn't a physical object at all. It was a way of thinking about service, a methodology for saving lives, a commitment to making things better for those who would come after. Several weeks later, the medical team faces their greatest challenge yet. A severe storm damages a bridge in a remote village, leaving several people trapped on the other side of a rain-swollen river. Among them is a young girl, maybe 8 years old, who was injured when debris fell during the storm. The local authorities are organizing a rescue, but it will take hours to bring in proper equipment, and the girl's condition is deteriorating rapidly. James assesses the situation. The river is dangerous, the current swift and unpredictable. Crossing it would be risky even without carrying medical equipment. Dr. Chin and the other team members argue against attempting it, but James can't shake the image of that little girl, alone and scared and hurt, waiting for help that might come too late. This is exactly the kind of situation my grandfather faced, he says quietly. Dangerous conditions, uncertain odds, but someone who needs help right now, not in a few hours. He didn't calculate risk-reward ratios. He didn't wait for perfect conditions. He saw someone who needed him and he went. Dr. Chin studies his face for a long moment. If you're going to do this, you're not going alone. I'm coming with you. Thompson continues, there's something else you should know. After that mission, your grandfather could have received a major commendation, possibly even a Medal of Honor. The commanding officer recommended it. But your grandfather refused. He said that the 2 soldiers who stayed with him deserved the recognition, not him. He said he was just doing his job, that anyone in his position would have done the same. That sounds like him, James says quietly. He never wanted recognition. No, but he deserved it. And maybe it's time his story was told properly, not for his sake, but for everyone who needs to understand what real service looks like. This conversation plants a seed in James's mind. Over the following months, as he continues his humanitarian work, he begins documenting his grandfather's story more thoroughly. He interviews Marcus Williams, the teacher whose life was saved. He talks to Thompson and the other soldier from the classified mission, a man named David Chin who now runs a veterans center and has stories of his own about Colonel Mitchell's compassion and skill. James discovers that his grandfather's free clinic, the one Major Carson mentioned, still exists. It's now run by a group of physicians who were trained by Colonel Mitchell, and it continues to serve the community just as it did when his grandfather was alive. James visits the clinic and meets Dr. Eleanor Rodriguez, who worked alongside his grandfather for 20 years. "Your grandfather taught me that medicine isn't just about treating diseases," Rodriguez tells him. "It's about seeing people, really seeing them, understanding their struggles, their hopes, their humanity." He knew every patient by name. He knew their families, their jobs, their dreams. He made them feel valued, not just as patients but as people. She shows James a wall in the clinic where thank you letters and photos are displayed, hundreds of them, spanning decades. Every one of these represents a life your grandfather touched. Some are from patients he treated. Others are from family members of patients, from medical students he mentored, from people whose lives intersected with his in ways large and small. This is his legacy, James. Not medals or monuments, but human connections, lives improved, hope restored. As James absorbs all of these stories, all of these revelations, he realizes that his understanding of the helmet's significance has evolved. It's not just a symbol of his grandfather's direct service during the war. It's a representation of a lifetime of service that extended far beyond any single act of heroism. It's a reminder that legacy isn't built in moments of dramatic action but in the consistent choice, day after day, year after year, to show up, to care, to serve. James begins writing, documenting everything he's learned. The project starts as a personal journal but gradually transforms into something larger, a comprehensive account of his grandfather's life and impact. He includes the technical aspects, the Mitchell Protocol and its influence on field medicine, but also the personal stories, the individual lives saved and changed, the quiet moments of compassion that never made it into any official records. 1 year after his conversation with General Thompson, James completes the manuscript. It's not a traditional biography but rather a meditation on service, legacy, and the countless ways one life can ripple outward to touch thousands of others. He titles it simply, The Helmet, A Legacy of Service. When he shares the manuscript with Dr. Chin, she's moved to tears. "This isn't just your grandfather's story," she says. "It's the story of every person who ever chose to serve without seeking recognition, who made the world better without asking for credit, who measured their success not in accolades but in lives touched and hope restored." James decides to submit the manuscript to a publisher that specializes in military and medical narratives. To his surprise, they're enthusiastic about the project. The editor, a veteran herself, sees the potential for the book to inspire a new generation of service-minded individuals. "We need stories like this," she tells James. "In a world that often celebrates the loudest voices and the flashiest achievements, we need reminders that some of the most important work happens quietly, without fanfare, sustained by nothing but commitment to something larger than oneself." The book is published 18 months later, and its impact exceeds anything James could have imagined. It becomes required reading at several military academies, including Riverside, where Major Carson, now dealing with health issues but still mentally sharp, conducts seminars on the themes James explores. Medical schools begin assigning it to students, using it to teach not just about the technical aspects of field medicine but about the ethical and emotional dimensions of healthcare. James receives letters from readers around the world. A young woman in Kenya writes to say that the book inspired her to become a nurse. A retired firefighter in Australia shares how the story helped him process his own decades of service and recognize the value of what he'd accomplished. A teacher in Brazil describes using the book in her classroom to teach students about different forms of heroism and success. But perhaps the most meaningful response comes from an unexpected source. Captain Derek Hartwell, the officer who mocked James on the parade ground years earlier, sends a handwritten letter. In it, he describes how reading the book forced him to confront the lasting impact of his actions that day, but also helped him understand the journey he's been on since then. "I've spent years trying to become the kind of officer I should have been from the beginning," Hartwell writes. "I'm now training field medics as I told you I would, and I make sure every single one of them knows about Colonel Mitchell and the protocols he developed. I tell them about you, about the day I let my prejudices and my own insecurities lead me to mock something precious. I use that story as a cautionary tale about how easy it is to miss what's truly valuable when you're focused on the wrong metrics." Hartwell's letter continues, But I also tell them about redemption, about second chances, about how even when we fail spectacularly, we can choose to learn and grow and become better. Your grandfather's legacy isn't just about his service. It's about the standard he set, a standard that challenges all of us to examine our values, our priorities, our understanding of what it means to live a meaningful life. 5 years after the parade ground incident, Riverside Military Academy holds a special ceremony. The old helmet, which has remained on display all this time, is being moved to a new position of honor in the Academy's museum. But it won't be alone. Alongside it will be Colonel Mitchell's medical insignia, donated by General Thompson, and a first edition of James's book, open to a page that describes the classified mission and the courage required to stay behind when everyone else was evacuating. James is invited to speak at the ceremony. As he stands before the assembled cadets, faculty, and visitors, he holds a copy of the book and looks out at faces representing a new generation of potential service members. Among them are the children and grandchildren of people his grandfather saved, though most of them don't know the connection. The web of impact has grown so complex that it's impossible to trace all the threads. When I first stood on this parade ground holding an old helmet, James begins, I knew it had belonged to my grandfather. I knew he was a medic, that he'd served with honor. But I didn't understand the depth of his legacy. I didn't know about the protocols he developed, the missions he completed, the countless lives he touched both during and after his military service. He pauses, gathering his thoughts. Over the past several years, I've learned that legacy isn't something you plan or construct. It's something you live. My grandfather didn't set out to create the Mitchell Protocol or to become someone whose methods would be taught to medics around the world. He simply saw problems that needed solving and tried to solve them. He saw people who needed help and helped them. He showed up, day after day, year after year, and did the work without worrying about whether anyone would remember his name. James looks at the helmet, now gleaming under museum lights. This helmet represents something important, but not because it's old or because it survived combat. It's important because it reminds us that every single act of service, every moment of compassion, every choice to help rather than to harm, contributes to something larger. We live in a world that often tries to measure worth in dollars and accolades, in titles and possessions. But the real measures of a life well lived are found in the people we help, the knowledge we share, the example we set. He closes the book and holds it up. I wrote this not to glorify my grandfather, though I'm immensely proud of him, but to honor a principle that he embodied perfectly. That service is its own reward, that making the world better is more important than being recognized for it, and that true legacy lives in the lives we touch, not in the monuments we build. The ceremony concludes with the unveiling of a new plaque that will accompany the helmet display. It reads, Colonel Robert James Mitchell, Field Medic. Through direct action he saved 147 lives. Through the protocols he developed, he influenced the saving of thousands more. Through the example he set, he inspired countless individuals to serve with compassion, courage, and humility. His legacy reminds us that the most valuable inheritances cannot be measured in material terms. As the crowd disperses, a young cadet approaches James hesitantly. She's barely 18, with nervous eyes and hands that fidget with the hem of her uniform. Excuse me, sir. I just wanted to thank you for writing that book. My family, we don't have much. I'm here on a full scholarship, and sometimes I feel like I don't belong, like everyone else has more experience, more resources, more of everything. But your grandfather's story helped me understand that what matters isn't what you start with. It's what you do with what you have. James feels a lump form in his throat. This is why he wrote the book, for moments like this, for young people who need to hear that their worth isn't determined by their circumstances. What's your name? Cadet Lisa Martinez, sir. Cadet Martinez, my grandfather would have been proud to know his story helped you. And I'm going to tell you what someone once told me, you're not here by accident. You're here because you have something valuable to contribute, something that has nothing to do with money or connections or any material advantage. Hold on to that. Remember it when things get tough. And someday, when you're serving in whatever capacity you choose, remember that your impact will ripple outward in ways you can't predict or measure. Martinez nods, her eyes bright with unshed tears, and walks away with straighter shoulders and a more confident stride. James watches her go, thinking about his grandfather, about the teacher whose life was saved, about all the students that teacher influenced, about the endless web of connection and impact that stretches across generations. Dr. Sarah Chin, who flew in from overseas for the ceremony, joins James as he stands contemplating the helmet display. You've done something remarkable, she tells him. You've taken a personal story and transformed it into a universal message. That's a rare gift. I just told the truth, James replies. Everything in that book happened. Every story is real. I know. That's what makes it powerful. In a world full of manufactured images and carefully curated lives, authentic stories of real service, real sacrifice, real impact, they resonate in ways that polished narratives never can. They stand together in comfortable silence, watching museum visitors examine the helmet, read the plaque, flip through the pages of the book displayed nearby. Some people spend just a moment there before moving on. Others linger, reading carefully, occasionally wiping their eyes. I've been thinking, Chin says after a while, about how to honor legacies like your grandfather's. The humanitarian organization I work with is starting a new fellowship program. We're calling it the Mitchell Fellowship, with your permission. It will provide training and support for aspiring field medics from underserved communities, people who might not otherwise have access to advanced medical education. James turns to her, surprised and deeply moved. You're naming it after my grandfather? Not just after him. In partnership with you. Part of the fellowship will involve studying the Mitchell Protocol in depth, understanding not just the technical aspects but the philosophy behind it. Fellows will read your book, learn about service-oriented medicine, and then go out into the world to serve in areas where medical care is scarce. It's a way to ensure that your grandfather's legacy continues to grow, that his impact extends into the future. He would have loved that, James says quietly. Not the recognition, but the idea that his work could help create opportunities for others to serve. Over the next several years, the Mitchell Fellowship becomes a prestigious and highly sought-after program. Fellows serve in disaster zones, refugee camps, rural communities, anywhere that skilled medical personnel are desperately needed. They wear a small pin, a replica of Colonel Mitchell's medical insignia, to remind them of the principles they've pledged to uphold: compassion, competence, courage, and commitment to service above self. James continues his own work, now splitting his time between field medicine and training others. He becomes an instructor, teaching the next generation of medics not just about technical skills but about the deeper meaning of service. He often brings the small replica helmet his grandfather's old helmet inspired to his classes, using it as a teaching tool to discuss legacy, values, and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances. One particular class stands out in James's memory. It's a group of 20 young medics, fresh from basic training, eager but uncertain about what lies ahead. James begins the session by placing the replica helmet on the table in front of them. Before we discuss medical procedures or emergency protocols, he says, I want to talk about why we serve. Not the official reasons, not the mission statements, but the personal motivation that will sustain you when everything else fails. He picks up the helmet and turns it slowly in his hands. This represents my grandfather's service, but it also represents a question that every one of you will face. What defines your worth? Is it what you own, what you achieve, what others think of you? Or is it something deeper, something that can't be taken away or diminished no matter what happens? One of the young medics, a serious-faced woman named Elena Reyes, raises her hand. Sir, how do you maintain that sense of purpose when you're exhausted, when you've seen terrible things, when you feel like you're not making enough of a difference? It's a question James has asked himself many times. That's the hardest part, he admits. There will be days when you doubt everything. Days when you wonder if your efforts matter. Days when the need seems so overwhelming that anything you do feels insufficient. He sets the helmet down gently. But here's what I've learned. You don't serve because you can fix everything. You serve because you can help someone. Maybe just one person. Maybe in a small way. But that one person, that small way, it matters infinitely to them. He shares the story of Maria, the young girl he and Dr. Chen rescued across the swollen river. I don't know what became of Maria. I like to think she recovered fully, that she's living a good life somewhere, but I don't know for certain. And you know what? That's okay. I didn't help her because I needed to see the results or receive gratitude. I helped her because in that moment she needed help and I could provide it. That was enough. That had to be enough. The training session extends into a deeper conversation about the emotional challenges of medical service, about handling grief and frustration, about finding meaning in work that often feels thankless. James finds himself drawing on his grandfather's example repeatedly, using stories he's collected over the years to illustrate different principles and approaches. My grandfather once told a young doctor who was feeling discouraged, "You're not responsible for solving every problem in the world. You're responsible for showing up and doing your best with the resources and knowledge you have. That's all anyone can ask. That's all you should ask of yourself." After the session ends, Elena Reyes stays behind. Sir, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you ever feel like you're living in your grandfather's shadow? Like no matter what you accomplish, you'll always be compared to him? James considers the question carefully. It's something he's wrestled with, especially in the early years after discovering the full extent of his grandfather's legacy. I used to, he says honestly. When I first learned about the Mitchell Protocol, about all the lives he'd influenced, I felt this pressure to somehow live up to that standard. It was paralyzing at times. What changed? I realized I was asking the wrong question. The question isn't, how do I live up to my grandfather's legacy? The question is, what's my own contribution going to be? My grandfather didn't try to be anyone else. He identified needs that he could address with his unique combination of skills, experience, and circumstances. That's what I need to do. That's what you need to do. Not imitate someone else's path, but find your own. Elena nods slowly, processing this. Thank you, sir. That helps. As she leaves, James reflects on how teaching has become one of the most rewarding aspects of his work. Every student he instructs, every medic he trains, represents another extension of his grandfather's legacy, another branch in the ever-expanding tree of influence and impact. Years continue to pass, and the story of the helmet takes on a life of its own. It's referenced in military training programs, cited in medical ethics courses, discussed in leadership seminars. The original helmet remains in the Riverside Military Academy Museum, but its image and story spread far beyond that single location. James receives an invitation to speak at an international conference on humanitarian medicine. The venue is impressive, a large auditorium filled with physicians, nurses, medics, and aid workers from dozens of countries. As he prepares his presentation, he feels the familiar flutter of nervousness mixed with purpose. His speech is scheduled for the final day of the conference, a closing keynote that will attempt to synthesize the themes and insights shared over the previous week. James takes the stage, carrying with him the small replica helmet and a worn copy of his book. Thank you for allowing me to close this remarkable conference, he begins. Over the past few days, we've heard about medical innovations, logistical solutions, funding strategies, and policy recommendations. All of these are crucial, all of them necessary. But I want to spend our final hour together talking about something less tangible but equally important, the spirit of service that brings us all to this work in the first place. He holds up the helmet replica. This represents my entry into understanding what service really means. It's a symbol of my grandfather's work, but more broadly, it's a symbol of all the unnamed, unrecognized, unheralded individuals who dedicate their lives to helping others without expecting anything in return. James describes the journey from that morning on the parade ground to this moment, touching on the key revelations and transformations along the way. But he also broadens the narrative, connecting his grandfather's story to the larger tapestry of humanitarian work represented in the auditorium. Every person in this room has their own version of this story, he says. Not necessarily an old helmet, but some object, some moment, some experience that crystallized your understanding of why this work matters. Maybe it was a patient who thanked you with tears in their eyes. Maybe it was a community that came together to support your efforts. Maybe it was a child who smiled despite unimaginable circumstances, reminding you of the resilience of the human spirit. He pauses, making eye contact with different sections of the audience. We live in a world that often measures success by the wrong metrics: income, fame, power, possessions. But everyone here has chosen a different path, a path that measures success by impact, by service, by the difference we make in lives that might otherwise be forgotten or overlooked. The speech continues for nearly an hour, weaving together his personal story with broader themes of humanitarian work, medical ethics, sustainable development, and the importance of maintaining hope in the face of overwhelming need. James shares letters he's received from readers of his book, stories from Mitchell Fellowship recipients, updates on people his grandfather saved who have gone on to create their own legacies of service. The remarkable thing about service-oriented work, he says near the end of his speech, is that its impact is literally incalculable. You save a life, and that person goes on to touch hundreds or thousands of others. You train a healthcare worker and they train others, creating an exponential expansion of knowledge and skill. You establish a clinic or a protocol or a system, and it continues to serve long after you're gone. This is the mathematics of compassion, where 1 + 1 never equals just 2, but rather multiplies into something far greater than we can measure or predict. He sets down the helmet and picks up his book, opening it to a page he's marked. I want to share one final story before I close. Last month, I received a letter from a woman in Japan named Yuki Tanaka. She's a surgical nurse, highly skilled, respected in her field. In her letter, she told me about her father, who was a soldier in a different military, a different conflict, but whose life was saved by a field medic who used techniques that, she later learned, came from the Mitchell Protocol. Her father survived, came home, raised a family. Yuki became a nurse because of her father's stories about the medic who saved him. She's now training the next generation of nurses in her country, passing forward the gift of knowledge and skill that ultimately traces back through decades and across cultures to my grandfather's work. James's voice grows thick with emotion. This is what legacy really means. It's not a name on a building or a statue in a park. It's a living, growing, evolving network of influence that touches lives in ways we can never fully know or understand. Every person you help, every student you teach, every protocol you refine, every moment of compassion you offer becomes part of this network. You become part of something eternal, something that transcends any individual life or accomplishment. The auditorium is completely silent, hundreds of people hanging on every word. James takes a breath and continues. So when you leave this conference and return to your work, whether it's in a well-funded hospital or a tent in a disaster zone, whether you're treating one patient or developing policies that will affect thousands, remember this: your work matters. Not because of how it will be recognized or rewarded, but because it represents a choice to be part of humanity's better nature, to be someone who helps rather than harms, who builds rather than destroys, who serves rather than takes. He holds up the helmet replica one final time. This old, battered helmet that a captain once mocked, that seemed worthless to eyes trained to value the wrong things, has become a symbol of something profound. It reminds us that the most valuable things in life can't be bought or sold, can't be measured in conventional terms, can't be diminished by mockery or misunderstanding. They exist in the realm of meaning and purpose, in the choices we make about how to spend our limited time on this earth, in the legacy of service that we leave behind for others to build upon. The speech concludes with a standing ovation that lasts several minutes. Afterward, James is surrounded by people wanting to share their own stories, their own versions of the helmet, their own moments of understanding what service really means. A physician from Nigeria talks about the medical textbook his grandmother wrote that's still used in rural clinics. A nurse from Canada describes the volunteer program her uncle started 30 years ago that's still running. A medic from Australia shares how a simple act of kindness from a senior officer changed his entire perspective on military service. These conversations continue long after the formal conference has ended, spreading into the hallways and reception areas, people gathering in small groups to exchange stories and insights. James realizes that this is the real value of events like this, not the formal presentations or the published proceedings, but the human connections, the shared understanding, the mutual recognition of belonging to a community defined by service rather than self-interest. That evening, back in his hotel room, James video calls his wife, Anna, whom he married 2 years earlier. She's a physician at the free clinic his grandfather founded, continuing the work that Dr. Rodriguez and others have maintained for decades. They met when James visited the clinic while researching his book, and their relationship grew from a shared understanding of service-oriented medicine and a mutual respect for the legacy they're both working to honor. How did the speech go? Anna asks, her face warm and concerned on the screen. Better than I could have hoped. People really connected with grandfather's story. But more than that, they shared their own stories. It became this beautiful exchange of experiences and insights. He pauses, collecting his thoughts. Anna, sometimes I'm overwhelmed by how much his legacy has grown, how many people have been touched by his work either directly or indirectly. It's humbling and inspiring and a little bit frightening. Frightening? Why? Because I wonder if I'm doing enough, if I'm honoring that legacy properly, if my own work will matter in the same way. Anna's expression softens. James, you've spent years documenting and sharing your grandfather's story. You've trained hundreds of medics. You've saved lives directly in the field. You've helped establish a fellowship program that's creating opportunities for future generations of healthcare workers. You're teaching at one of the most respected medical training programs in the country. What more do you think you should be doing? I don't know. I just feel like there's always more that could be done. There is always more that could be done. That will always be true. But you're not responsible for solving every problem or meeting every need. You're responsible for showing up and doing your best with the resources and knowledge you have. She smiles gently. Sound familiar? That's what your grandfather told that young doctor, remember? The advice you've repeated to countless students. Maybe it's time you took it to heart yourself. James laughs, recognizing the truth in her words. When did you get so wise? I married a man who carries around a replica of his grandfather's helmet and writes books about legacy and service. Some of that thoughtfulness was bound to rub off. They talk for another hour, discussing the conference presentations, sharing news from home, making plans for when James returns. These moments of connection, of sharing life with someone who understands the demands and rewards of service-oriented work, have become precious to James. Anna grounds him, reminds him to maintain perspective, helps him remember that life is meant to be lived fully, not just endured in service of some abstract ideal. Several months after the conference, James receives news that Major William Carson has passed away. The old officer who played such a crucial role in that transformative day on the parade ground died peacefully in his sleep at age 72. James immediately arranges to travel to the funeral, which is held at Riverside Military Academy with full military honors. The ceremony is well attended, filled with current and former military personnel, academy graduates whose lives Carson touched, and family members paying their respects. During the service, the commandant of the academy shares stories about Carson's distinguished career, his commitment to developing young leaders, his unwavering integrity and compassion. When it's James's turn to speak, he approaches the podium with the replica helmet in his hand. Major Carson was the first person outside my family to truly understand what my grandfather's legacy meant. When Captain Hartwell mocked me for inheriting an old helmet, when I stood on that parade ground feeling humiliated and small, Major Carson saw what others missed. He saw value where others saw junk. He saw meaning where others saw meaninglessness. He saw an opportunity to teach a profound lesson about worth, dignity, and what it means to serve with honor. James describes how that single intervention changed his life trajectory, opening doors of understanding that led to everything that followed. The research into his grandfather's full legacy, the book, the fellowship program, his own career path. Major Carson didn't just defend me that day. He gave me a gift, the gift of understanding that legacy matters, that service matters, that the choices we make about how to live our lives have consequences that ripple outward in ways we can never fully predict or measure. He holds up the helmet replica. Major Carson wore a helmet like this in his own service. He saved lives, he trained others, he embodied the principles he taught. His legacy, like my grandfather's, will live on through the hundreds of officers he trained, the thousands of cadets he influenced, the countless individuals whose lives are better because he chose to serve with integrity and compassion. After the funeral, James stands with a group of Carson's former students, swapping stories about the tough but fair instructor who pushed them to be better than they thought they could be. One of them, now a colonel himself, shares a memory that James has never heard. About 6 months before Major Carson retired, the colonel says, he called me into his office. I was going through a difficult time, questioning whether I belonged in the military, whether I was making a difference. He took out a photo album and showed me pictures of students he'd taught over the decades. Hundreds of them. And he said, every single one of these people had moments of doubt. Every one of them wondered if they were good enough, if their service mattered. But they kept showing up. They kept trying. They kept serving. And collectively they've made the world immeasurably better. You're part of that tradition. Your doubts don't disqualify you. They make you human. The colonel's eyes glisten with tears. That conversation changed everything for me. I stayed in the service, I kept pushing forward, and I've tried to pass that same message to the people I've trained. That's Major Carson's legacy. Not just the individuals he influenced directly, but all the people we've gone on to influence in turn. This thought stays with James as he drives back home, processing the loss of someone who played such a pivotal role in his journey. He thinks about the chain of influence and impact. His grandfather saving lives and developing protocols, Major Carson recognizing and honoring that legacy, James documenting and sharing the story, countless others being inspired to serve more thoughtfully and compassionately. Where does one legacy end and another begin? Perhaps they don't end at all, perhaps they simply blend together into a vast tapestry of human service and sacrifice that spans generations and cultures and circumstances. When James arrives home, Anna meets him at the door with news that makes him pause and wonder. I'm pregnant, she says simply, tears of joy streaming down her face. We're going to have a baby. The news hits James with unexpected force. Baby. A child who will carry forward not just his genes but his values, his understanding of service, his connection to his grandfather's legacy. The thought is both exhilarating and terrifying. Over the following months, as Anna's pregnancy progresses, James finds himself thinking deeply about what he wants to teach this child, what values he wants to pass forward, what kind of example he wants to set. He realizes that his grandfather didn't just leave him a helmet. He left him a way of understanding the world, a framework for making decisions, a commitment to service that could be passed forward indefinitely if he's intentional about it. One evening, James and Anna sit together assembling a crib for the nursery. Have you thought about names? Anna asks. I have, James admits. If it's a boy, I'd like to name him Robert after my grandfather. But only if you're comfortable with that. Anna smiles. I was hoping you'd say that. And if it's a girl? I was thinking maybe Eleanor after Dr. Rodriguez. She's been like a grandmother to me, connecting me to my grandfather's work at the clinic, teaching me about his approach to medicine and to life. Eleanor Rose Mitchell, Anna says, testing the name. That's beautiful. As it turns out, they have a daughter. Eleanor Rose Mitchell arrives on a crisp autumn morning, healthy and vocal and perfect. When James holds her for the first time, he feels the full weight of legacy and responsibility settling on his shoulders. This tiny person, so vulnerable and dependent, represents the future. What kind of world will she inherit? What values will guide her? What example will he set? Over her first few years, as Eleanor grows from infant to toddler, James and Anna work to create a home environment that embodies the principles they hold dear. They volunteer together at the free clinic, bringing Eleanor along so she can see service in action even if she's too young to understand it fully. They make charitable giving a regular part of their lives, not out of obligation but because they want Eleanor to understand that those who have resources have a responsibility to share them. They tell stories, lots of stories, about her great-grandfather in the helmet, about Major Carson in the parade ground, about all the people whose lives are interconnected through service and sacrifice. When Eleanor is 4 years old, James takes her to visit the Riverside Military Academy Museum. She's fascinated by all the displays, the uniforms and weapons and flags and photographs, but she's especially drawn to the old helmet in its place of honor. Is that really your grandfather's? She asks, pressing her nose against the glass case. It is, sweetheart. He wore that helmet while he helped people who were hurt. He was very brave. Was he scared? The question catches James off guard. He's told Eleanor sanitized versions of his grandfather's stories, appropriate for her age, but he's never really considered the emotional reality of what his grandfather faced. Yes, I think he probably was scared sometimes. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what needs to be done even when you're afraid. Eleanor processes this, her young mind working through the concept. When I grow up, I want to help people too. Like great-grandfather Robert. James feels his eyes sting with tears. You can help people in lots of ways, Eleanor. You don't have to be a doctor or a soldier. You can be a teacher, an artist, a scientist, a parent. What matters is that you look for opportunities to make the world better, to be kind, to serve others when they need help. Can girls wear helmets too? James laughs. Absolutely. Girls can be soldiers, medics, doctors, anything they want to be. Your mom is a doctor, and she helps people every day at great-grandfather's clinic. They spend another hour in the museum, with James sharing age-appropriate stories about various displays. As they're leaving, Eleanor tugs on his hand. Daddy, do we have a helmet at home? One like great-grandfather's? I have a small one, a replica that looks like his helmet. Would you like to see it? Eleanor nods enthusiastically, and when they return home, James retrieves the replica from his study. He lets Eleanor hold it carefully, her small hands struggling with the weight. She examines it seriously, tracing the contours with her fingers. This is special, she declares with the certainty of childhood conviction. It is special. Very special. And someday when you're older, I'll tell you all the stories about why it's special, about what it means and what it represents. Years continue to pass. James publishes a second book, this one focused on practical applications of service-oriented leadership in various fields, from medicine to education to business. The Mitchell Fellowship expands, opening new programs in additional countries. The free clinic thrives under Anna's leadership and that of the other physicians who have dedicated themselves to serving underserved populations. Eleanor grows into a thoughtful, compassionate child with a natural inclination toward helping others. She volunteers at the clinic alongside her parents, does fundraisers for various causes, stands up for classmates who are being bullied. James and Anna watch with pride and hope, seeing in their daughter the continuation of a legacy that stretches back generations. One day when Eleanor is 12, she comes home from school upset. A teacher made a dismissive comment about her volunteer work, suggesting she was only doing it to look good on college applications rather than out of genuine concern for others. The comment hurt Eleanor deeply, calling into question her motivations and sincerity. James sits with her in his study, the replica helmet visible on the shelf behind his desk. Tell me what happened. Through tears, Eleanor describes the incident. I really do care about the people at the clinic, Dad. I'm not just doing it to impress anyone. I like helping people. It makes me feel good to know I'm making a difference even if it's small. But now I'm wondering if that's wrong, if I shouldn't feel good about it, if maybe the teacher is right and I'm just being selfish. James takes a moment to gather his thoughts, knowing that what he says now could shape how his daughter understands service for the rest of her life. Eleanor, there's nothing wrong with feeling good about helping others. In fact, that feeling is part of what sustains us in this kind of work. Service shouldn't be miserable or joyless. It should be fulfilling, meaningful, something that gives your life purpose and direction. He reaches for the replica helmet and hands it to her. Your great-grandfather chose to be a medic, to run toward danger and help people, because it gave his life meaning. He felt good about saving lives. That didn't make him selfish. It made him human. We're wired to feel satisfaction when we help others, when we contribute to something larger than ourselves. That's not a character flaw. That's one of the best parts of being human. Eleanor holds the helmet, her tears slowing. So it's okay that I enjoy volunteering? More than okay. It's wonderful. What wouldn't be okay is if you only helped people when you knew you'd get credit for it, or if you boasted about your service to make yourself look better than others, or if you helped selectively based on who could benefit you in return. But helping people because it aligns with your values, because it makes you feel connected to something meaningful, because it brings you joy, that's exactly how service should feel. He tells her about the parade ground incident, about Captain Hartwell's mockery and Major Carson's intervention, about how sometimes people who don't understand service will try to diminish or dismiss it. Your teacher doesn't know your heart, Eleanor. Only you know your true motivations. And based on everything I've seen, everything your mom and I have witnessed, you're one of the most genuinely compassionate people I know. Don't let someone else's cynicism make you doubt that. The conversation becomes a turning point for Eleanor, strengthening her commitment to service while also teaching her that not everyone will understand or appreciate what she's trying to do. She learns to find validation internally, from her own sense of purpose and from the people she serves, rather than seeking approval from those who are predisposed to misunderstand. When Eleanor is 16, she applies for and receives a special summer internship through the Mitchell Fellowship Program. She'll spend 8 weeks in a rural community clinic in Central America, shadowing physicians and learning about healthcare in resource-limited settings. It's a competitive program, and Eleanor is one of the youngest participants ever accepted. The night before she leaves, James gives her a gift. It's a small box carefully wrapped. Eleanor opens it to find a delicate necklace with a tiny helmet pendant, a miniature replica of her great-grandfather's helmet, crafted in silver with loving detail. "Dad," she breathes, holding it up to the light. "It's beautiful. I had it made especially for you. I wanted you to have something to remind you of why you're doing this work, of the legacy you're part of. Not because you have to live up to anyone's expectations, but because you come from a tradition of service, and that's something to be proud of." Eleanor puts on the necklace immediately, touching the tiny helmet with her fingers. "I'll wear it every day. I'll remember great-grandfather Robert and Major Carson, and all the stories you've told me. I'll remember that service isn't about seeking recognition. It's about showing up and doing what needs to be done." Anna joins them, wrapping both James and Eleanor in a hug. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart. Not because you got accepted into this program, though that's wonderful, but because of who you are, the person you're choosing to become." The 8 weeks Eleanor spends in Central America transform her understanding of healthcare, poverty, resilience, and her own capabilities. She witnesses extreme need but also extraordinary human strength. She sees families facing unimaginable challenges who still find reasons to laugh, to hope, to help each other. She works alongside local healthcare workers who serve their communities with limited resources but unlimited dedication. She emails her parents regularly, sharing experiences and insights. One message particularly moves James. Eleanor writes, "Today I met a woman who walked 6 hours to bring her sick child to the clinic. 6 hours on foot, carrying a 3-year-old because she knew we could help. And after we treated her daughter, after we gave her medicine and instructions for follow-up care, she cried and thanked us over and over. She brought us eggs from her chickens, which I know she can't really afford to give away, because she wanted to show her gratitude. I thought about great-grandfather Robert and how many people must have felt that same overwhelming relief when he helped them. I understand now why he kept serving, why he never stopped. Once you've seen that kind of gratitude, that kind of desperate need met with compassionate care, you can't forget it. You can't walk away from it. It becomes part of who you are." When Eleanor returns home, she's changed. She's more mature, more purposeful, more certain about the direction she wants her life to take. She tells her parents that she wants to become a physician, to work in underserved communities, to continue the tradition of accessible healthcare that her great-grandfather started and that her mother has carried forward. James watches his daughter with a mixture of pride and awe, seeing in her the embodiment of everything his grandfather believed in, everything Major Carson tried to teach, everything he himself has worked to honor and preserve. The legacy continues, not as a burden but as a gift, passed forward through the generations, adapted and renewed by each person who embraces it. Time moves forward in its inexorable way. James continues his work, training medics, speaking at conferences, supporting the Mitchell Fellowship and other service organizations. He sees his book referenced in academic papers, used in classrooms, cited in discussions about leadership and ethics. The original helmet remains in the Academy Museum, but its influence has spread far beyond that single location. He receives a message one day from someone he hasn't heard from in years. Captain Derek Hartwell, the officer who mocked him on the parade ground so long ago. Hartwell is now retired from active duty, working as a civilian instructor for military medical training programs. His message is brief but heartfelt. James, I wanted you to know that I teach your grandfather's story to every class I instruct. I tell them about my failure that day on the parade ground, about my narrow-mindedness and prejudice. I tell them about the helmet and what it represented, about the legacy I was too blind to see. More importantly, I tell them about redemption, about how we can change and grow if we're willing to confront our mistakes honestly. Your grandfather's legacy helped save me from becoming a bitter, closed-minded officer who measured everything in the wrong terms. I'm grateful for that and I wanted you to know. With deep respect, Derek Hartwell. James reads the message several times, moved by Hartwell's continued growth and his willingness to use his past failures as teaching tools. He responds with warmth and appreciation, affirming Hartwell's journey and expressing gratitude for his ongoing service. Years later, when James is in his 50s and Eleanor is a physician working in a community health center, they travel together to Riverside Military Academy for a special commemoration. It's the 50th anniversary of Colonel Robert Mitchell's death, and the Academy is hosting a symposium on his legacy and its continuing impact on military medicine and humanitarian service. The event is remarkably well attended, drawing participants from around the world. There are military medical personnel, civilian doctors and nurses, former recipients of the Mitchell Fellowship, academics who study leadership and ethics, and dozens of people whose lives were directly or indirectly touched by Colonel Mitchell's work. The original helmet is removed from its display case for the event, placed on a special podium where attendees can view it up close. James stands beside it with Eleanor, both of them studying the scratches and dents that tell silent stories of courage and sacrifice. A very elderly man approaches them slowly, supported by a younger woman who appears to be his daughter. He's thin, frail, but his eyes are bright and alert. When he reaches the helmet, he reaches out with a trembling hand, gently touching the worn surface. "I never thought I'd see this again," he says, his voice cracking with emotion. James and Eleanor exchange glances. "Did you know my grandfather?" James asked gently. The old man nods, tears streaming down his weathered face. "He saved my life. I was 19 years old, hit by shrapnel during an ambush. I should have died right there in that jungle. But this man, this incredible man wearing this helmet, he came running through enemy fire. He patched me up, dragged me to safety, stayed with me until evacuation arrived. He kept talking to me the whole time, telling me about the life I was going to live, the family I was going to have, the future that was waiting for me." The man's daughter supports him as his emotions threaten to overwhelm him. "Everything he told me came true. I went home, married my sweetheart, had 3 children, 8 grandchildren, 2 great-grandchildren now. I became a teacher, spent 40 years helping kids learn and grow. I've had a good life, a full life, all because of the man who wore this helmet." He looks at James with desperate intensity. "Is he still alive? Can I thank him? I've been searching for years trying to find him, but the military records were incomplete, and I only knew him as Captain Mitchell. I didn't even know his first name." James's throat tightens. "I'm so sorry. My grandfather passed away many years ago, but I'm his grandson, James. And this is my daughter, Eleanor, his great-granddaughter. We're honored to meet you, to hear your story." The old man clasps James's hand with surprising strength. "Then let me thank you. Thank you for sharing his story, for making sure people know what he did, what he meant. I read your book. I've told my children and grandchildren about the medic who saved me. They know that their entire family exists because of one man's courage and compassion." This encounter is repeated throughout the day with variations. A woman whose father was saved by Colonel Mitchell. A man whose life was saved using the Mitchell protocol by a medic who learned the techniques decades after they were first developed. a physician who was inspired to enter medicine after reading James's book. Each story adds another thread to the vast tapestry of influence and impact. During the symposium, Eleanor is invited to speak, representing the newest generation of the Mitchell legacy. She takes the stage with poise, wearing the tiny helmet necklace her father gave her years ago. "I never met my great-grandfather," she begins. "He died before I was born. But I've known him my entire life through stories, through his work, through the example he set. I've grown up surrounded by his legacy, not as a burden but as an invitation to be part of something larger than myself, to serve with purpose and compassion, to measure my success not by what I accumulate but by what I contribute." She describes her own journey, from a child visiting the Academy Museum to a teenager volunteering at the clinic to a medical student training in underserved communities to a practicing physician continuing the tradition of accessible healthcare. "I don't carry a physical helmet like my great-grandfather did. But I carry his principles, his commitment to service, his belief that every life has value and dignity. That's the real legacy, not a piece of equipment but a way of understanding the world and our place in it." Eleanor's speech concludes with a challenge to the audience. Each of us has the opportunity to create a legacy of service. It doesn't require extraordinary circumstances or special talents. It requires showing up, paying attention to need, responding with compassion and competence. It requires choosing day after day to be someone who helps rather than harms, who builds rather than destroys, who serves rather than takes. That's what my great-grandfather did. That's what my father has done. That's what I'm committed to doing. And that's what I invite each of you to do, to be part of this continuing story of service that stretches across generations and cultures and circumstances. The symposium ends with the announcement of a new initiative. The Riverside Military Academy, in partnership with several medical organizations and humanitarian groups, is establishing the Colonel Robert Mitchell Center for Service-Oriented Medicine. The center will conduct research, provide training, and support programs that embody the principles Colonel Mitchell exemplified: compassionate care, innovative problem-solving, commitment to serving underserved populations, and the development of replicable systems that can continue to function long after their creators are gone. James is asked to serve on the center's board of directors, which he accepts with humility and determination. The work continues, evolving to meet new challenges and opportunities, but always rooted in the fundamental principles that an old helmet has come to represent. As the event concludes and people begin to depart, James and Eleanor stand together one final time beside the helmet display. The late afternoon sun streams through the windows, casting a golden glow on the worn metal surface. "Dad," Eleanor says quietly, "do you think great-grandfather could have imagined all of this? That a helmet he wore during the war would become a symbol known around the world? That his work would influence so many people across so many years?" James considers the question carefully. "I don't think he imagined it, and I don't think he would have wanted to imagine it. He was focused on the immediate, on the person right in front of him who needed help. He didn't serve to create a legacy. He served because service was its own reward, because helping people was the right thing to do regardless of what came after." He puts his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "But here's what I believe: even if he couldn't have imagined all of this, he would have been pleased by it. Not pleased for himself, not proud in an egotistical way, but pleased that his work continued to matter, that the principles he lived by continued to inspire others, that service continued to spread and multiply across generations." Eleanor leans into her father. "I want to live a life that makes him proud, that honors what he started." "You already are, sweetheart. Every day, every patient you treat, every kind word you offer, every moment you choose compassion over convenience, you're honoring his legacy. You're creating your own legacy too, one that your children and grandchildren will carry forward in their own ways." They stand in comfortable silence for a few more moments before turning to leave. As they walk out of the museum, James glances back one final time at the helmet, silhouetted against the window, still teaching its lessons to anyone willing to look beyond surface appearances and recognize true value. The story could end here, with multiple generations united in service, with a legacy secure and thriving, with lessons learned and passed forward. But the most profound truth about this story is that it doesn't end at all. It continues every day in countless acts of service performed by people who have been touched, directly or indirectly, by Colonel Robert Mitchell's example. It continues in the field medic working in a disaster zone who uses the Mitchell Protocol without knowing its origins. It continues in the medical student who reads James's book and decides to specialize in serving underserved populations. It continues in the child who visits the Academy Museum and sees the helmet and asks her parents what it means. It continues in the retired officer who shares the story with his grandson, teaching him that worth cannot be measured by possessions. It continues in Dr. Sarah Chin and countless others like her who dedicate their lives to humanitarian medicine. The helmet itself, that physical object of worn metal and cracked leather, remains in its place of honor at Riverside Military Academy. But its meaning has transcended the physical. It has become an idea, a symbol, a reminder that the most valuable inheritances are not material possessions but principles, values, examples of how to live with purpose and meaning. Captain Hartwell learned this lesson the hard way, through mockery and shame and the long road of redemption. But he learned it, and in learning it he became a better officer, a better teacher, a better human being. His story too is part of this larger narrative, a reminder that we all make mistakes, that we all sometimes value the wrong things, but that we can change, grow, and contribute to something better than what we found. Major Carson understood this truth instinctively, which is why he intervened on that parade ground so many years ago. He saw an opportunity to teach a profound lesson, not just to James or Hartwell, but to an entire generation of cadets who witnessed the exchange. His legacy lives on through all those students who learned from his example, who absorbed his wisdom, who went out into the world determined to look beyond surfaces and recognize deeper truths. And Colonel Robert Mitchell, the humble medic who wore an old helmet and saved lives and developed protocols and served his community and raised his grandson with love and wisdom, he lives on in the most meaningful way possible. Not through monuments or awards, not through fame or recognition, but through the countless lives that are better because he lived, because he served, because he showed what it means to measure success by service rather than self-interest. On a quiet evening many years after the symposium, James sits in his study, now gray-haired and weathered by decades of service. He's writing in a journal, documenting his thoughts and experiences for Eleanor's children, his grandchildren, who are still young but already showing signs of the compassionate, service-oriented values that have defined their family for generations. He writes, "If there's one lesson I hope you'll take from this family story, it's this. You are not defined by what you own or what you achieve in conventional terms. You are defined by how you treat others, by what you contribute to the world, by the choice you make over and over again, to be someone who helps rather than harms. This is your inheritance, more valuable than any material possession could ever be. This is your legacy to build upon and pass forward. This is what it means to be part of something larger than yourself." He pauses, looking at the replica helmet on his desk, the one that has accompanied him through so many years, so many experiences, so many moments of doubt and clarity. Then he continues writing, "An old helmet, mocked by someone who didn't understand its value, became the catalyst for understanding what truly matters in life. Let this be a reminder to you. Never judge worth by appearances, never dismiss what seems insignificant, never assume you understand the full story based on surface observations. The most valuable things are often the least obvious. The most profound legacies are often the quietest. And the most important work is often the work that goes unrecognized and unheralded, done not for praise but for purpose, not for reward but for meaning." The journal entry ends with a simple statement: be kind, be brave, be of service. That is the inheritance that matters most. He stands and walks to the window looking out at the evening sky. The sun is setting, painting the clouds in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere in the world, a medic is treating a wounded soldier using techniques his grandfather developed. Somewhere, a doctor is working in a free clinic inspired by the model his grandfather established. Somewhere, a young person is reading his book and feeling inspired to serve. Somewhere, Eleanor is caring for a patient with the same compassion and skill that have defined this family's approach to medicine for generations. The phone rings, breaking his reverie. It's Eleanor, calling from the community health center where she works. "Dad, I have news," she says, and James can hear the excitement in her voice. "The board just approved a new program I proposed. We're going to start training community health workers, people from the neighborhoods we serve, giving them the skills to provide basic healthcare and health education in their own communities. It's based on the model great-grandfather used after the war, creating sustainable systems that empower local people rather than creating dependency on outside experts." James feels his heart swell with pride. "Eleanor, that's wonderful. Your great-grandfather would be so proud." "I'm so proud. There's more. We're calling it the Mitchell Community Health Initiative. And Dad, we want you to help with the training. You have so much experience teaching medics and this isn't that different. Will you do it?" "Of course I will. I'd be honored." After the call ends, James sits back down at his desk, looking at the replica helmet with fresh appreciation. The legacy continues to evolve, to adapt to new circumstances and challenges, but the core principles remain constant. service, compassion, empowerment, sustainability. Each generation takes what they've inherited and builds upon it, adding their own insights and innovations while staying true to the fundamental values. Several weeks later, James stands in front of the first cohort of community health worker trainees. They're a diverse group, ranging in age from early 20s to late 60s, representing the neighborhoods the clinic serves. Many of them have personal experience with inadequate healthcare access. All of them are motivated by a desire to make a difference in their communities. James begins the training session not with medical information but with a story. He tells them about his grandfather and the helmet, about Captain Hartwell's mockery and Major Carson's intervention, about the journey from that moment of humiliation to this moment of continuation and growth. My grandfather understood something crucial, James tells the trainees. He understood that sustainable healthcare isn't about outside experts swooping in to fix problems. It's about empowering communities to take care of themselves, building local capacity, creating systems that can function and grow long after the original helpers have moved on. He holds up the replica helmet. This represents not just individual service but systematic thinking. My grandfather didn't just save 147 lives directly. He developed protocols that could be taught to others. He established a clinic that could continue serving after he was gone. He trained people who went on to train others. That's the model we're following here. We're not just teaching you to help people. We're teaching you to create sustainable systems of care in your own neighborhoods. The training program runs for 6 months, combining medical knowledge with community organizing skills, cultural competency, and practical problem solving. James teaches alongside Anna and other experienced healthcare providers, but he also learns from the trainees, who bring in valuable insights about the communities they serve, the barriers they face, the creative solutions that might work where traditional approaches have failed. One trainee, a woman named Maria Gonzalez, reminds James powerfully of why this work matters. She's in her 50s, raised 6 children while working multiple jobs, and now wants to give back to her community. During a class discussion about motivation for service, she shares her story. When my youngest daughter was sick, I didn't have insurance, didn't have transportation, didn't know where to go for help. I was terrified, desperate. A neighbor told me about a free clinic, about doctors who would see her without asking about insurance or immigration status. We went and they treated her with such kindness, such respect. They didn't judge us. They just helped. That was 15 years ago. My daughter is healthy now, in college, studying to become a nurse herself. I never forgot that kindness. I never forgot how it felt to be seen as a human being worthy of care. That's why I'm here. I want to be that person for others in my community. Maria's story resonates with the other trainees, many of whom have similar experiences of being helped during difficult times and wanting to pay that kindness forward. James realizes that this is exactly what his grandfather would have wanted: people from within communities stepping up to serve their neighbors, creating networks of care that are sustainable, culturally appropriate, and built on mutual respect and dignity. The program launches successfully, with the trained community health workers fanning out into their neighborhoods, providing education, connecting people to resources, offering basic health assessments, and serving as bridges between their communities and the formal healthcare system. The results exceed expectations, with improved health outcomes, increased preventive care, and stronger community cohesion. 2 years after the program begins, James receives an invitation to present their results at a national conference on community health. Eleanor joins him, and together they describe the Mitchell Community Health Initiative, its theoretical foundations and Colonel Robert Mitchell's approach to sustainable healthcare, and its practical outcomes in improved community well-being. During the question and answer session, a young man in the audience stands. "I'm a medical student," he says, "and I'm trying to decide what kind of medicine to practice. I'm being told that the way to succeed is to specialize, to focus on the most lucrative areas of medicine, to build a practice that will be financially rewarding. But your presentation, your family story, it makes me wonder if I'm being guided by the wrong values. How do you balance practical concerns like financial stability with the desire to serve meaningfully?" James exchanges a glance with Eleanor before responding. "That's one of the hardest questions anyone in healthcare faces. I won't tell you that financial concerns don't matter. We all have to support ourselves and our families. But I will tell you this: my grandfather was never wealthy. My mother worked at the free clinic and was never wealthy. I've spent my career in service-oriented medicine and have never been wealthy. None of us have regretted those choices for a moment." He pauses, choosing his words carefully. There are different kinds of wealth. Financial security is one kind, and it's not unimportant. But there's also the wealth of meaningful work, of feeling at the end of each day that you've made a genuine difference. There's the wealth of strong relationships with patients who trust you and appreciate your care. There's the wealth of being part of a community, of knowing you belong to something larger than yourself. My family has been rich in these ways, even when we haven't been rich financially. Eleanor adds, I'll be honest with you. I have friends from medical school who earn 3 or 4 times what I do. They have bigger houses, fancier cars, more impressive vacation photos. And sometimes I wonder what it would be like to have that kind of financial freedom. But then I go to work and I see Mrs. Ramirez, who brings me tamales to thank me for treating her diabetes. I see the Johnson kids who are healthy because we caught their health issues early and provided preventive care. I see my colleagues who are passionate about our mission and committed to our community. And I know I made the right choice. Not the only right choice, but the right choice for me. The young medical student nods thoughtfully, and after the session ends, he approaches James and Eleanor to talk further. They spend an hour with him, sharing more details about their paths, their challenges, their rewards. As they talk, James realizes that this, too, is part of the legacy, these one-on-one conversations that help guide the next generation toward meaningful service. Time continues its forward march. James enters his 60s, then his 70s. He officially retires from active medical practice but continues teaching, mentoring, supporting the various programs that have grown from his grandfather's original work. Anna retires as well, and together they travel, visiting Mitchell Fellowship sites around the world, meeting with program graduates, seeing firsthand the ripple effects of service that began with one medic and an old helmet. Eleanor takes on greater leadership roles, becoming the director of the Community Health Center and expanding its programs to serve even more neighborhoods. She trains the next generation of community health workers, publishes research on community-based healthcare models, and advocates for policies that support accessible, dignified care for all people regardless of their ability to pay. Eleanor's children, James's grandchildren, grow up steeped in this tradition. They volunteer at the clinic, hear the family stories, wear tiny helmet pendants of their own. Each of them will choose their own paths, some in healthcare and some in other fields, but all of them will carry forward the fundamental values of service, compassion, and commitment to something larger than individual success. On a crisp autumn morning, James returns to Riverside Military Academy one final time. He's now 81 years old, moving more slowly but still sharp, still engaged, still passionate about the work that has defined his life. The Academy is celebrating the 100th anniversary of his grandfather's birth, and James has been invited as the guest of honor. The museum has been expanded and redesigned. The helmet remains in its place of honor, but now it's surrounded by a comprehensive exhibit documenting Colonel Robert Mitchell's life and legacy. There are photographs, documents, personal items, testimonials from people he saved, explanations of the Mitchell Protocol, copies of James's books, information about the Mitchell Fellowship and the Mitchell Community Health Initiative. The exhibit traces the evolution of one man's service into a global movement that has touched countless lives across multiple generations. James stands before the display with his family surrounding him. Anna, still beautiful and sharp-eyed at 79, Eleanor, now in her 50s and at the height of her career, his 3 grandchildren, young adults beginning their own journeys, and several great-grandchildren too young to fully understand but absorbing the family's values simply by being present. The Academy's current commandant, a woman named General Patricia Williams, approaches the family. Mr. Mitchell, it's an honor to have you here. Your grandfather's legacy has shaped this institution in profound ways. Every cadet who passes through here learns his story. They learn about the helmet, about service, about measuring worth by the right metrics. It's one of the most powerful lessons we teach. James nods, his eyes on the helmet. My grandfather never sought this kind of recognition. But I think he would be pleased to know that his story continues to inspire, to teach, to remind people what really matters. General Williams smiles. There's something we'd like to share with you. Please come with me. She leads the family to another part of the museum, to a new section that has been cordoned off with a ribbon. A small crowd has gathered, including current cadets, faculty, and visitors. At Williams's signal, the ribbon is cut and the new section is revealed. It's called the Legacy Wall, and it contains hundreds of photographs and brief biographies of people whose lives have been touched by Colonel Robert Mitchell's work. There are the soldiers he saved directly, like Marcus Williams the teacher. There are people saved by the Mitchell Protocol. There are Mitchell Fellowship recipients. There are community health workers from the initiative Eleanor leads. There are people who read James's book and were inspired to serve. There are second and third generation impacts, children and grandchildren of people who were saved, students taught by teachers who were saved, patients cared for by healthcare workers who were trained in service-oriented approaches. The wall is vast, covering an entire section of the museum, and yet, as General Williams explains, it represents only a fraction of the actual impact. We could never document every life that's been touched, she says. The web of influence is too complex, too far-reaching. But we wanted to show visually what legacy really means. It's not one person's accomplishments. It's the exponential growth of good that happens when service becomes a value that spreads from person to person, generation to generation. James walks slowly along the wall, reading names and stories, seeing faces of people from dozens of countries and countless backgrounds, all connected by a common thread: service, compassion, the choice to help rather than to harm. His eyes fill with tears, overwhelmed by the scope of what his grandfather started, what has grown from one man's simple commitment to doing the right thing. Eleanor takes his hand. "Are you okay, Dad?" "More than okay," James says, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm grateful. Grateful that I inherited that helmet all those years ago. Grateful for Captain Hartwell's mockery because without it, I might never have truly understood what I had. Grateful for Major Carson's wisdom. Grateful for every person who has carried this legacy forward. Grateful that meaning and purpose can be passed from one generation to the next like a precious gift." The ceremony continues with speeches and presentations, but James is only partially present, his mind wandering through decades of memories. He thinks about standing on the parade ground as a young cadet, humiliated and hurting, clutching an old helmet and wondering if Hartwell was right, if his inheritance was worthless. He thinks about the moment Major Carson revealed the helmet's history, the feeling of understanding washing over him like a revelation. He thinks about discovering the Mitchell Protocol, meeting the people his grandfather saved, writing the book, establishing the fellowship, training countless medical personnel, watching Eleanor grow into a leader in her own right, seeing his grandchildren embrace the family's values. All of it, every moment of meaning and purpose and fulfillment, traces back to that old helmet and the man who wore it. Not because the helmet itself was magical or special, but because it represented something true and lasting. That service matters, that compassion matters, that how we treat others defines us in ways that possessions never could. As the ceremony concludes and people begin to mingle, James finds a quiet corner where he can sit and observe. He watches cadets examining the exhibits, reading the stories, touching the glass case that holds the helmet. He watches families taking photos, children asking questions, adults talking earnestly about service and legacy. He watches his own great-grandchildren running around with other children, too young to sit still for long but absorbing something important simply by being in this space, surrounded by stories of courage and compassion. A young cadet, no more than 19 or 20, approaches hesitantly. "Excuse me, sir. Are you really Colonel Mitchell's grandson?" "I am," James confirms with a smile. "I just wanted to say thank you. I come from a family that doesn't have much. I'm here on scholarship, and sometimes I feel like I don't belong, like I'm not good enough because I don't have the background some of the other cadets have. But your grandfather's story, it helps me remember that worth isn't about what you have. It's about who you are and what you do with what you've been given." James feels a wave of déjà vu, remembering Cadet Lisa Martinez, who said almost exactly the same thing so many years ago. The struggles are the same across generations, the doubts and insecurities that come from living in a world that constantly tries to measure worth by the wrong metrics. But the lessons are the same too, the truths that can be learned and relearned and passed forward indefinitely. "What's your name?" James asks. "Cadet Thomas Chin, sir." "Cadet Chin, let me tell you something that someone once told me, something that changed my life. You're not here by accident. You're here because you have something valuable to contribute, something that has nothing to do with money or connections or any external advantage. The question isn't whether you belong here. The question is what you'll do with this opportunity, how you'll serve, what legacy you'll create." He reaches into his pocket and pulls out the small replica helmet he still carries, the one that has accompanied him through so many years. He holds it out to the young cadet. "I want you to have this. It's a replica of my grandfather's helmet. I've carried it for decades as a reminder of what really matters. Now I'm passing it to you. Carry it through your training, through your service, through whatever path your life takes. Let it remind you that true worth can't be mocked or diminished because it exists beyond material measurement." Chen's eyes widen. "Sir, I can't accept this. It's too valuable, too meaningful to your family. Its value lies in what it represents, not in the object itself. And what it represents needs to be passed forward, shared, lived out in each generation. Take it. Honor it by living according to the principles it embodies. And someday when the time is right, pass it forward to someone else who needs the reminder. With trembling hands, the young cadet accepts the replica helmet. He holds it carefully, reverently, understanding instinctively that he's receiving something far more precious than a piece of metal. He's receiving a trust, a responsibility, a connection to a legacy that spans generations. I won't let you down, sir. I won't let your grandfather down. I know you won't. And remember, the way you honor this legacy isn't by being perfect or by achieving great fame. It's by showing up, day after day, and choosing to serve with compassion and integrity. That's all my grandfather ever did. That's all any of us can do. As the young cadet walks away, James feels a profound sense of completion. The helmet, or at least this replica of it, has found its way to another person who needs its lesson, who will carry it forward into the future. The original helmet will remain in the museum, teaching its lessons to thousands of visitors. But the principles it represents will continue spreading through countless individual acts of kindness, through the choices people make about how to live and who to serve. That evening, as the sun sets over Riverside Military Academy, James stands one final time on the parade ground where his story truly began. The spot where he stood holding the helmet while Captain Hartwell mocked him. The spot where Major Carson intervened and changed the trajectory of his entire life. The spot where a moment of pain and humiliation transformed into understanding and purpose. Anna joins him, taking his hand. They stand together in comfortable silence, watching the flag lowered with military precision, watching cadets complete their evening routines, watching the sky paint itself in colors of orange and gold and purple. Do you ever regret it? Anna asks quietly. The path we chose? The service-oriented life instead of pursuing wealth or prestige? James doesn't have to think about his answer. Not for a single moment. We've lived rich lives, Anna. Not in money but in meaning. We've made a difference. We've been part of something larger than ourselves. We've raised a daughter who is making the world better. We've seen our grandchildren embrace values that will guide them well. We've watched a legacy grow and expand in ways we never could have imagined. What more could anyone want? I agree, Anna says, leaning her head against his shoulder. We've been blessed. Not in the ways the world usually counts blessings, but in the ways that actually matter. They stand together as darkness falls, two people who have dedicated their lives to service, who have honored a legacy they inherited, who have passed forward lessons and values that will continue long after they're gone. The old helmet sits in its museum case, still teaching, still inspiring, still reminding everyone who sees it that true worth cannot be measured in conventional terms. The parade ground empties, the cadets dispersing to their dormitories and evening activities. James and Anna turn to leave, walking slowly, hand in hand, toward the parking lot where their car waits. Behind them, the academy building stands strong and steady, training the next generation of leaders, passing forward traditions and values and lessons learned over decades and centuries of service. And somewhere in those buildings, a young cadet named Thomas Chin sits in his room, holding a small replica helmet in his hands, studying its contours, thinking about the story he's just heard, making promises to himself about the kind of person he wants to be, the kind of service he wants to render, the kind of legacy he wants to create. The story that began with mockery and misunderstanding, that grew through revelation and dedication, that expanded across generations and cultures and circumstances, continues. It continues in every act of service performed without seeking recognition. It continues in every choice to measure worth by contribution rather than accumulation. It continues in every person who decides that meaning matters more than money, that purpose matters more than prestige, that serving others is the highest and best use of a human life. The old helmet, battered and scratched and dented, remains in its place of honor, a silent witness to the power of service, the value of compassion, and the eternal truth that some inheritances are beyond price. It reminds us that what we receive from those who came before us is not just possessions or property, but principles and examples and invitations to be part of something noble and enduring. Captain Hartwell learned this lesson through shame and redemption. Major Carson taught it through wisdom and intervention. Colonel Robert Mitchell lived it through decades of quiet service. James Mitchell documented it and passed it forward. Eleanor Mitchell expanded it and adapted it. And countless others, known and unknown, have embraced it and made it their own. This is the story of an old helmet that was mocked and dismissed, that was revealed to be precious and meaningful, that became a symbol recognized around the world. But more than that, it's the story of how we define worth, how we measure success, how we understand the meaning of a life well lived. It's a story that asks us to look beyond surface appearances, to recognize value in unexpected places, to understand that the most important inheritances are not material but spiritual, not possessions but principles. And it's a story that never truly ends, because as long as people choose service over selfishness, compassion over cruelty, meaning over materialism, the legacy continues. It continues in you, in me, in everyone who hears the story and decides that they, too, want to be part of something larger than themselves, something noble and enduring, something that will outlast any individual life and touch countless others across the span of years and generations. The sun has set completely now. The stars are beginning to appear in the darkening sky. And somewhere, in 100 different places, people are making choices about how to live, what to value, who to serve. Some of them know the story of the old helmet. Others have never heard it. But all of them have the same opportunity, the same invitation, the same chance to create a legacy that matters, to live a life defined not by what they own but by what they give, not by what they achieve but by whom they serve. This is the inheritance that cannot be mocked, cannot be diminished, cannot be taken away. This is the legacy that endures. This is the story of an old helmet and everything it came to mean, and everything it continues to teach us about what really matters in this brief, precious life we've been given. #full 60-minute script. Captain mocks a cadet for inheriting only an old helmet.